Welcome everybody to the last in our series of this summer's UCL Rare Books Club, which is happening online. I'd like to say a big thank you to all of you for supporting us throughout the series, and most of all to our fantastic moderating team. I'm Tabitha Tuckett and I'm a Rare Books librarian here at University College London at UCL. And today we've got a rather special session which involves 4 of the finalists for this year's Anthony Davis Student Book Collecting Prize, which was open to students from universities all the way across London. We received an astonishing 64 applications, and I'd like to thank all of those students who applied, because I know many of you did so under very, very difficult circumstances just at the time of lockdown here in the UK, and I know many of you were travelling home or abroad and were applying from abroad. And in fact, we have one of our speakers also who is going to speak today to us long distance. Just before I introduce the prize a little bit more, I'd like to help you to navigate Zoom if you haven't done so before. You'll see at the bottom a range of controls, including on the very left a microphone button which you can mute, and I would recommend this if you aren't already muted. I think you may already be muted. And if you're having any difficulties with the audio, I would also recommend switching off your video, which is the next symbol, if you've not already done so. This is just to help to get the audio as strong as we can. We've got a very large audience today, and also in the middle of the bottom, you can see a sort of speech bubble, and at the end of the talks, you can click that for chat and post questions there. But if you have any technical difficulties, you can also post a chat message there to our moderators and they'll try to help you. Finally, in the top right, you have a couple of options for Zoom. There's a little box with lots of different squares, and that means that you can see lots of little squares for everybody who's here. But I would recommend that you switch it to the speaker view, which is a square with some little dots on top, so that you can get the full screen picture, because what's fantastic about today is that our speakers are going to show you their physical books, and I want everybody to be able to see those in as much detail as possible. So for those of you who are tuning in new to this series, welcome. I'd like to give you a bit of context to the speakers today. They are all students, and they are not necessarily book historians. They have applied for a prize which has been set up by Anthony Davis, who has very generously funded this prize, and it's set up to support collectors, book collectors and manuscript collectors. And I'm just going to read out to you the conditions of the prize so that you get a feel for what we were looking for. The intention is to encourage collecting, and we expect that applicants' collections will be embryonic, so their size, their age and their value are irrelevant. What is much more important is the enthusiasm and the commitment of the collector, the interest of the theme, and the vision of how the collection will be developed in the future. So that's to give you some sort of idea of what the judges were looking for. We are going to have a celebration of enthusiasm, because all of the speakers today, I know, absolutely love their collections, and they have submitted applications about collections that they've had in their home or their parents' home for quite a while. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to Anthony Davis and to the judges, and those of you who were in our first Anthony Davis session in this series, where we had Alexandra Plain, the winner, speaking, you will have heard from Anthony Davis his very moving introduction about what motivated him to set up this prize. I'd also like to thank the judges. We had a representative from the Bibliographical Society, a representative from the, who was also at the British Library, representative from the Antiquarian Booksellers Society, representative from Senate House Library, and also from UCL Special Collections. So a huge thank you to all of you and to Anthony Davis. So our first speaker today is Kelly Liu, and she is going to speak to us about her collection of English private press books from the early 20th century. Kelly is finishing off an MA in early modern studies, so her collection is really quite a different historical period from her professional studies. So Kelly, I don't know if you're there. Fantastic. Over to you, Kelly.
Hi. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to share with you about my collection today. So my collection focuses on poetry books published in England during the private press movement. As a literature student, I'm intrigued by the contents of books, but also their design and binding. I was first introduced to the private press books and the made-for-subscriber system when I came across a poetry anthology in 2014. It is this one. It's called The Cupid, a collection of love songs. It's published in 1891, and it's actually a poetry collection that was first published in the 18th century, and it's a reissue. Thereafter, I continued to discover and collect private press books that contain texts that interest me and that I find aesthetically pleasing. In order to learn about the beautiful books that I acquired, I did some research online, and I also tried to talk to bookstore owners. And I learned that the private press movement was a movement in book production that started around the turn of the 20th century under the influence of scholar artisans William Morris, Sir Emery Walker, and their followers. It was an offshoot of the arts and crafts movement, rejecting the cheap mechanized book production methods after the Industrial Revolution. The bookmakers in the movement created books by traditional printing and binding methods, with the emphasis that book is a work of art and a manual skill, besides being a medium of the transmission of information. And the private press books are usually made with high quality materials such as handmade paper, traditional inks, and sometimes specially designed typefaces, and are often bound by hand. Created as a unified entity, a private press book is carefully designed in its format, type, page design, illustration, and binding. And the private presses often have no profit motives and produce books in limited numbers. Some books are made exclusive for their subscribers. I don't actually remember when did I start paying attention to the design of the books, but I've always believed that books have their values as an object, and that it deserves to be designed and bound carefully and properly to enhance or celebrate the content, the value of its content, and that after decades or even centuries, they can still be appreciated. And I think this belief in some sense coincides with the intention of the private press movement, and I think it is the reason why the private press books intrigue me so much. Some private press books come with slip cases, some are made with durable materials such as leather and cloth, and I think such kind of designs, besides being an aesthetic expression, it also shows people that books are valuable and important objects for us to care for. So with my collection, I intend to show the diversity and the aesthetics of the designs of the private press books. The dates of the texts range from antiquity to early modern and all the way to the 20th century. Some of the books were purchased from secondhand book dealers by my mom and I when we were traveling in England, Wales, or the States in the past 7 years. And others were bought when I was exploring the secondhand bookstores in London last year. So I will start introducing my collection in a chronological order. Yeah, and most of them are translations or reissues of ancient modern texts. So the first one is Pindar Pythian Odes, translated by Wade Gray and Baura. It was printed by the Nonsuch Press in 28 in London, and the original Pythian Odes by Pindar was written in the 5th century BC. It's a small octavo, as you can see, has 165 pages. Top head is skilted, comes with a cute slipcase like this, and it's numbered. Pages here is it's number 616 out of 1,050 copies. And then, so the Nonsuch Press, what's interesting about it is that so it was founded in 1922 in London, but it followed a policy that it would only publish books that are not in print or exist in very limited numbers of editions or translations. And it's not the most popular classical text, and that is why they made it. And the second is Petrarch's 26 sonnets of the divine poet Francesco Petrarch, done into English by William Ibbott. It's printed at the High House Press in 1929 in Shaftesbury, and Petrarch's sonnets were originally written in the 14th century. It's a false cap quarto, as you can see, and it's also numbered. It's the number 76, I think, out of 165 copies, and you can see the typefaces are very beautifully designed. Yeah, and I bought this book at Collins and Clark. It's a rare book store very close to UCL and the British Library. And its owner, Oliver, he's really nice and told me lots of things about private presses and book owners he knew. And the third one is, I also bought this from Collins and Clark. It's a Latin version of Shakespeare's sonnets, translated by Thomas Barton. This book is printed in 1913 at Chiswick Press, and it's a very beautiful copy because I love it because the cover is made of full vellum, and it's actually quite rare. In this edition, only very limited numbers come with this vellum cover. Yeah, I think, yeah, it's only just under 70. And there's also a portrait of the scholar translator Barton in the back. Next is the Selected Poems, Divine and Humane by Thomas Beeden, who was an early modern poet. This is also made by the Nonsuch Press in London in 1928. Yeah, it's a very delicate copy. The cover is made of limp vellum, and there are 3 leather straps on the spine with a small slip case. My favorite part about it is that it is designed with this flowery decorations, and the page designs actually tries to imitate its early modern original. Yeah, so as you can see, some pages are yeah, all the pages were uncut, some even unopened. So it was not very popular in the 17th century in its own time. So I don't think it's too popular either when they remade it in the 20th century. But I think it's a fun work for me to add into my collection. Yeah, the next is from a more famous author, like the famous John Milton, his Paradise Regained. Yeah, I have a plastic film over it, so there might be some glare. Yeah, it's published in London in 1924 with illustrations by Thomas Lewinsky. I will show you one of the illustrations. Yeah, it's very beautifully made. It's actually the first edition. Yeah, I think it's a good combination for an early modern text with a contemporary 20th century artist. This is one of the illustrations. Yeah. And next is the Cupid poetry collection. As you can see, it is very beautifully bound with marbled paper and red leather decorated in the top cover, and also marbled paper inside. Yeah, so this is actually my first private press book, and you can see there it's actually a list of the names of the subscribers inside, and it's so the original collection was first published in London in 1736, and this edition was published in 1891, and the book publisher Murray regards it a valuable example to be rescued from oblivion, so he preserved the original wording and 13 engravings in the original collections. Yeah.
That's fantastic, Kelly. We're just running short of time. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I have one last book.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Super.
Yeah. Yeah, so the last one is also my favorite. I can take out the film for this one. It is the Poems of Pleasure by Ella Wheeler Wilcox, published in 1911. It's a full vellum cover decorated with spine and the cover with green and red floral pattern and gilded on top with very beautiful pattern paper inside. And although it's a work by a 20th century poet, the book designers designed it in the style of medieval illuminated manuscripts. So I think it's a very stunning combinations and artistic creation manifested in this book. And yeah, I will show you some of the pages. So there it's there's a color front piece by Frank C. Pape here. I'm not sure if he's a famous artist, and yeah, I'm not sure if you can see the details, but it's very carefully drawn and illuminated. Like every page was in different color. Some are gilded. Yeah, it's just a very stunning piece of art. Yeah, and that is my collection.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kelly. Your enthusiasm just comes bursting through the computer screen. And I also wish that I could reach through the computer screen and have a good look at that last book, which is absolutely beautiful. I'd also like to thank you because I think it's late in the evening for you. So thank you very much for joining us to do that.
No, not at all. Thank you for having me.
That's fine. And we can have a bit of time for questions at the end if anyone can stay after 2.
Yes.
So our next presenter is Bori Papp, and Bori is going to present her collection of books illustrated, they're Hungarian, well, she can say illustrated by Hungarian artists, and they're Hungarian translations of English literature books. Bori's collection itself is actually in Hungary, but Bori is in the UK. So Bori, I think, are you going to use a PowerPoint? Bori, I think you need to unmute your mic.
Hey, sorry about that. Yes, so if that's okay, I will use a PowerPoint presentation. So my collection is a collection of illustrated books, all by Hungarian artist Piroska Szántó. Let me really quickly share my screen so that I can show you some pictures of the books. Yes. So I have titled my collection Non-Compliance in Illustration, and that's because all of the books in my collection are ones that were published in Hungary during the communist era. However, during the 1950s and 60s, some members of the intelligentsia in Hungary would conform to the expectations put forward by the communist regime, while some others risked marginalization and difficulty having their works published. And the books in my collection, well, most of them are from authors that do not fit into the literary standard that one would expect from books printed during the communist era. So some of them include Virginia Woolf or T.S. Eliot or François Villon. And just to circle back to the illustrator for a second, her name is Piroska Szántó. She started out as an artist. She was a member of the European School, which is a circle of independent Hungarian artists committed to maintaining a connection with the art community in Western Europe. And after the group was dismantled in 1948, Szántó began to do more illustration work. And the books in my collection are from this period. I'm going to show you some pictures of the books together very quickly, and then I will go on to talk about each of them in detail. So the first one is Virginia Woolf's Orlando. You can see how on this page it has an inscription which reads, "To Gyula Kiss with love, Piroska Szántó." So the illustrations in this book are all in black and white, and they have a very sketchy style that's typical of many of her illustrations. I really like this one. And I also really like her interpretation of the novel itself, which is about, well, different time periods and queerness and gender identity, which, like, that to me does not sound like a book that you would commonly find published in communist Hungary, and still it was published in translation and illustrated, which means that there is one, interest in it, two, somebody decided that it was not outside the realm of possibility. The next book in my collection is Shakespeare's The Tempest. It's actually one of my favorites. I really like the black drawings on black paper and the details in gold. I just think it's really beautiful how she portrays the action in the play. The next one is a collection of poems by Catullus, the Roman poet. The title of the collection is I Hate and I Love. So these drawings are, as far as I see, a bit different in style, and they and also I think that they represent the content of the poems very well, which is often erotic and yeah. Sorry. The next one, next book in my collection is again a collection of poems. This one is by a Hungarian poet named Miklós Radnóti. The title is Eclogues, and it's a tiny book. It could potentially fit in somebody's pocket. The illustrations are all in black and white and very simple, but I think they're very evocative, and especially because this is wartime poetry, and I just think that's a very good representation of what the poems are trying to convey. The next book in my collection is also a collection of poems by French medieval poet François Villon. What I find very interesting about the illustrations in this one is that they imitate the style of stained glass windows in Gothic churches, which would have been a common art style at the time when Villon was alive. So it's just very thematically appropriate, and also very beautiful and colorful, and just like very high artistic quality. The next book in my collection is You Better Come Home With Me by Joan Lawson. The illustrations here are again in black and white, and we return to the sketchier art style, which we commonly see in her children's books. This was, I think this was the first book that I owned from the collection. The rest were assembled later, but I have had this one from early in my childhood. And well, the next one is The Cat That Walked by Himself by Kipling, which again, a very famous English author whom you would not expect to find published in communist Hungary. The illustrations in this one are usually full page illustrations, and they are in color. They almost look like crayon drawings to me. Yes, and then this book is the last one in my collection. It's also one of the oldest. I have owned it since I was very young. And debatably, it's my favorite because of its portrayal of animals, and its very few but very evocative and very unique illustration style and color schemes. This is Macavity, the Mystery Cat. This is Rum Tum Tugger. And this is Old Deuteronomy. I think this is all. If you have any questions, or if there's anything that you would like to me to talk about, I'd be happy to. answer.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Bori. And we'll have time for questions at the end. Those were just fantastic. I've been, before reading your application, I had never seen the Hungarian translation of T.S. Eliot's Old Possum's Book of Cats. And that's just wonderful. And I should have said that Bori is studying for a BA in Comparative Literature. Thank you so much, Bori.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Blake Harrison. Blake is studying for a BA in English Literature, and his collection is of editions of James Joyce's Ulysses. So over to you, Blake, if you're there.
Hi, and thanks for having me on to talk about my collection. So this collection's kind of grown out of my interest in Ulysses' publishing history, so I'm going to try and present them in roughly the order I acquired them, so I can kind of get across how it's developed, as well as talk about why I think Ulysses, its published editions, are interesting in themselves. So the first copy of Ulysses that I bought, which I got from a Waterstones as a teenager, I didn't intend for it to be in a collection, hence how kind of beat up the spine is. I mean, I guess I should briefly say, for anyone who doesn't know, Ulysses is an epic modernist novel from published in 1922, written by James Joyce. You know, I mean, I'm sure you guys know, but about a single day in Dublin in the early 20th century. Its characters broadly map onto the wanderings and the events of Homer's Odyssey. But I think it's probably best known for its experimentation in prose and particularly towards the end of the book, you know, various chapters which are in kind of surreal play scripts or single sentences, that kind of thing. And I think its reputation is as a very long and difficult and detailed book. And I mean, it is all of those things, which wasn't helped for me when I first read it by the fact that this edition, as published, has just absurdly small typeface, which was not at all useful trying to get through it. But I guess I'd say after reading this and loving it, the thing that really started my collection was a book that came out a few months later in 2014 called The Most Dangerous Book, The Battle for James Joyce's Ulysses by Kevin Birmingham. And it's a really kind of compelling and vivid non-fiction book about Joyce's struggle to get Ulysses written and then distributed. And I think reading this and learning about Ulysses' own kind of odyssey to publication really, that's kind of what inspired me to try and start seeking out other versions of the book, as I go on to explain. But I mean, on a general level, it's a book that has an enormous level of kind of detail and heft and weight, and so it feels just particularly appropriate to me to try and like accrue different copies of it. The story in this book, though, is that of Joyce, who took 7 years to write Ulysses, often with very little money. And during that time, he published early chapters of it in small modernist magazines, which during that time became banned in the US and the UK as they were deemed to have pornographic content. And that meant that when Joyce tried to publish the book, he could only get it published privately in a bookstore called Shakespeare & Co. in Paris by a woman named Sylvia Beach. And that run of copies is the one on the cover here with the famous blue cover. There's 1,000 of them, and they run now to upwards of £500,000. So I don't have one of those in my collection, and I've had to like settle for something lower. But I did visit a few years ago Shakespeare & Co. and I bought this edition of Ulysses there, which is the, as it says on the front, the Oxford 1922 text. And the reason why this text is kind of notable at all is that when Ulysses was originally published, it was rushed publication for Joyce's 40th birthday, and you know, you can tell with the result, because it was just absolutely filled with errors and mistakes. And the reason for this is that Joyce had terrible handwriting, and in order to compile the very long book, he'd sent his manuscripts to French typists, not all of who could speak English or read his handwriting. They would type it up, filled with errors, and then he would continue to revise those error-filled type-ups, which then, you know, accrue further error. So eventually the book, you know, resulted in these kind of layers and layers of kind of accreted mistakes, which means that effectively there's no single original version of Ulysses. There's no, there's no book that Joyce wrote from beginning to end over a course of years that we can kind of point towards as the correct version. And as a result of that, there's been decades of people going back and forth trying to like recompile the text in different ways, which just personally I find really interesting. And the other thing about this copy of the book is I brought it to Dublin with me a few years ago, and the beginning of the book takes place in a location called the Martello Tower, which actually exists, and I went and got a stamp of the tower there in the front of this book, which, it means a lot to me to be able to go and read the book right where it actually took place and started. The next kind of big event in the timeline of the Ulysses editions was that in the 1930s it won a landmark Supreme Court case in America where it was deemed not pornographic and of literary value. And this was an enormously important case for censorship laws in America, but it meant that it could be published in the US and the UK. And I have found one of the early copies that came out in the UK. And actually in the back of this copy, there's an appendix with the transcribed, judge's verdict in America about the kind of literary value of the book. And this copy I also enjoy because it has the kind of very iconic Odysseus's bow on the spine, which, obviously it reflects the title. But if I'm also thinking about kind of early copies I found of Joyce's stuff, while Joyce isn't very well known for being a poet, and for good reason, his poetry isn't very good, but there's this collection called Poems Penny Each, which I have a modern copy of here. It's very small, but I'm interested in it because it's the only piece of writing that Joyce did while he was composing Ulysses and later published, and it's kind of interesting just to see some other task he was carrying out while composing this monumental novel. And I found in a bookstore the early Faber and Faber, if you can see, Faber and Faber's uncorrected proof copy of their edition of it, which I don't often take out of the slipcase, but it's a really interesting little, I'm always very interested in the kind of the pieces that go towards the final publication of a book. So I was really excited to have this. On a general note as well, if there is anybody is interested and ever wanted to read more about the history of Ulysses, Richard Ellman's biography, enormous biography called James Joyce, is the most authoritative version of the events surrounding the publication of the book. And if we're looking at other companion volumes, the other famous one is Don Gifford's Annotations of Ulysses, which you can see is absolutely enormous, and I think is a real testament to the kind of depth and heft of Ulysses. And I bring this up because when I got this volume, I went and bought the what's called the Gabler edition of Ulysses, which is what the line numbers of the annotations use. And the Gabler edition is, nowadays it's the one that all academics use, version of the text. And its brief history is that in the 1980s, a German scholar called Hans Walter Gabler, he completed a much publicized effort to make an authoritative version of Ulysses. He went over all the different surviving drafts and manuscripts and tried to kind of compose some ultimate version of the text. I mean, the problem is, as I was saying earlier, that there is no original single version of Ulysses to point towards. So there was a lot of kind of scholarly back and forth, articles published in newspapers criticizing it, that kind of thing. But it's now kind of settled as the accepted version. But it's definitely it's one end of the scale in terms of trying to deal with the problem of what to do with Ulysses, where the 1922 edition, just leaving it uncorrected, is the other. And I was also lucky enough to find this 3-volume version of the Gabler edition, which the reason I'm interested in it is it has these, every page, I don't know if you'll be able to see, I can find an interesting page. Every page has, on the facing page, annotated editor's notes. So it's all printed twice, one after the other. And it kind of shows the enormous, ridiculously extensive effort required to, make something of Ulysses in terms of an editorial perspective. Finally, just before I finish, a few weeks ago, I was able to get my hands on this enormous edition of Ulysses, which is the 2017 folio edition. I don't often go for folio editions. I don't always think they're necessarily very nice, but this one is really beautiful. And on the front, it's got this illustration, which is meant to be the kind of intricacies of the book all looping together. And on the inside, it's got an enormous map of Dublin. And there's this illustrator called John Vernon Lord, who for every chapter of the book has done a kind of book plate illustration, if I can quickly flick to one, which is meant to be it's meant to reflect the different schemata that Joyce gave towards the book. Each one is kind of composed like that. So that's been my most kind of, this is the kind of cornerstone, I think, of the beautiful editions of Ulysses to find. And the other, before I finish, fun, kind of silly version of Ulysses that I found a while ago is, I don't know if I'm going to make the whole thing go up, but it's a single poster copy of the entire book in very, very small text. I don't know if you'll be able to see it if I hold it up close. I don't actually know which edition of Ulysses they used for this, but I'm not sure it's ever going to be a very practical thing to put on the wall, but it's a kind of fun thing to own to show the whole, scope of the entire thing on one page. So yeah, that's where my interest in Ulysses lies, and that's my collection. Thanks.
Thanks, Blake. That's absolutely wonderful. It's really nice to see that since your application, you've added to your collection with that last edition. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Yeah,
That's fantastic.
Myself running the degree.
Yeah, well done, well done. And who would have thought that you could fit the whole of Joyce's Ulysses onto a single poster? So we're rushing through here. Our final speaker is Kit Rooney. Now, Kit is studying for a BA in German and History, and her collection is really interesting and actually matches a number of university collections. It's about the annotations in books, especially the ones by lesser known people. So I'm going to hand over to Kit if you're there.
Hi there. Hiya. Well, thank you so much for having me speak today. And apologies due to unforeseen circumstances, thanks to this lovely virus. I'm away from my physical collection, but I've got a presentation to share with you. So I'll just quickly share my screen with all of you so I can show you some of the lovely inscriptions that I am going to talk about. Hopefully that will be working. Sorry about that, someone's just ringing my doorbell. So my collection of books, all of which have some form of inscription or addition to the original copy. So that can range from handwritten inscriptions that are wishing someone a happy birthday, or maybe when it's been given as a gift, or interesting objects that have been used as bookmarks. The amount of postcards I found with lovely letters that have been used as bookmarks. So yeah, the criteria I have to add to this collection is really, really wide. I have no set rule or anything for what I can add to it. It just needs to be an interesting oddity, inscription, anything that interests me personally. So I think I started it really because I started it accidentally, because I found personally book collecting to be quite intimidating, and there was definitely a part of me coming from quite a small school where literature wasn't really focused on necessarily, and I found this was a way to get into it that was much less daunting and far more personal, and it meant that I didn't have to know a huge amount about specific bindings or specific authors or anything. It just really let me discover different worlds of books based on what I thought about whatever was written inside it. So for that reason, I think I can sort of boast one of the most unique collections, because even if someone else decides to collect based on those criteria, no one else will ever have the same inscriptions, because that's the wonderful thing about them. They're so unique. So I'll begin with the very first inscription that I ever found. So this book was a gift given to me by my grandfather, and it's a collection of Wordsworth's poems. I hope you can all see the screen. And inside there's a collection there's a little inscription dated in 1894, and so it was a book that was passed down from mother to daughter. And then just underneath it, you'll see an inscription from 1958. And I'll just read that aloud for you now. So, bought by Gary Coleman as we walked to BBC Bush House the first day we met, later married and still enjoy this book. So that was actually written by my nan in 1958. And the Gary Coleman mentioned is my grandfather. So if you think about it, I actually owe a whole lot to this book, really. And I don't know if there are any other historians listening today. I think everyone who loves books does tend to enjoy their history. I really can't compare it to anything else, just the excitement of holding a physical copy, a tangible piece of history, especially when, for me, it's such a personal piece of history. And so yeah, that was what sparked the collection. And sort of from then on, I was very lucky, and there were lots of happy accidents where I happened to find other sort of similar inscriptions. So the next few I'll just show you on the screen. The one on the left was found in a book about Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and the book itself has beautiful pictures of the city and the Corniche and the places you can go as a tourist, but in sort of hidden inside the sort of slipcover, I found this article written in, I believe it's 1999, by the incredibly famous Mary Colvin. And you'll be able to see that a picture of one of the sheikhs has been very meticulously cut out by the Saudi censors who intercept all the post going into Saudi Arabia. And often they object to images of certain people who perhaps they don't want publicised within the kingdom. So I found that just so fascinating. And then the other one on the right hand side is a beautiful Christmas book that's Enid Blyton's Christmas book, and it was given as a gift Christmas 1942. And I have lots and lots of books that have inscriptions relating to Christmas or birthdays, and I just really sometimes I like reading them at the same time of year as they were given, because I feel like it's a really nice connection to a stranger that you'll never met and has probably long since passed, but it's those personal connections that I really enjoy, that sort of bounce off the page when you find that piece of writing. This is also one of my absolute favourites. So it was also a gift from my mum right before I was lucky enough to go to the Amazon rainforest, and I wish I had it with me, because the images inside are gorgeous etchings of the rainforest, but on the inside cover you'll see it was a prize awarded to a girl called Mary Newton in 1882, and I really enjoy thinking about a really young girl in 1882 being given this incredible book about explorers and, you know, dangerous snakes and things, and maybe sort of her dreaming about going there one day. And yeah, that's I think one of the more aesthetically gorgeous parts of my collection that I have, because not all of them are necessarily beautiful to that standard, if that makes sense. Some of them are sort of quickly scrawled, some of the books in my collections, you know, like that article, or, you know, quickly scrawled postcards. A lot of them have coffee spilled on them, but I think it's almost it's like when you see a child's toy, like the more beaten up they are, I think that's an indication of how treasured it was in a way, and that, you know, it was just a part of everyday life. But I just love the imagery on this one, and the cover is gold embossed, and it's such a lovely book to hold. And finally, I'll talk you through this book. So this was, I think, my most surprising find. So I picked up this book called A Salute to Adventurers, which has a beautiful red cover, and I picked it up in a Muswell Hill bookshop for £1.50, and I didn't actually look on the inside at all until quite a bit later, and it was only then that I saw this lovely stamp, and this book had been given as a wedding invitation to possibly someone called Billy, as you can see the name in the top corner. And then it was also later, after discovering that it had been a wedding invitation, that I discovered the family tree on the back cover that had been glued inside by Jessica and John, I presume. So I think it was just it struck me as a really brilliant and inventive way to use a book. And it's also, these inscriptions just let you have a really exciting glimpse into people's lives. I think the way I try to explain it to people that think I'm a bit odd for collecting this is that it's a little bit like eavesdropping on a conversation that someone's having on their phone on a bus, and you get one half of the conversation and you sort of get to fill in the blanks of the other side. So you get to create these sort of fun stories, and just, you know, it does make me really curious, you know, why did a book that, you know, I'd probably keep as a keepsake as a wedding invitation end up in a charity shop? Did this person not go to the wedding? Did the wedding happen? Are they still happily married? You know, just that the cogs in your brain start turning, and I think that's a really fun part of it. And I think this book's also quite important because it shows the shift in how people use books as objects as opposed to something to read as entertainment. Their sort of symbolic significance has changed in a lot of ways, and that relies on the aesthetic of the book as opposed to necessarily the content. And the fact that there's an entire family history of this book going back what looks like 3 or 4 generations, I think that really emphasises how interesting it's going to be in the future when we look back at the journey the book as a physical object has taken. And yeah, I just think yeah, it's a really beautiful way to find connections with people and have the layers of stories that you can find thanks to these inscriptions are really incredible. So you do need a lot of luck and a little bit of imagination to find inscriptions, and there's a lot of trawling through charity shops. But yeah, I'm so grateful to be able to share my funny little collection with so many people, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Kit. I would not describe that as a funny little collection at all. I would describe it as fascinating and very, very personal, the way you present that. And I hope that's a real inspiration. I know we've got some future students who are going to come to university in the autumn. I hope that's a real inspiration that you can form your own book collection without having to spend a lot of money. You just need to look at whatever it is that appeals to you inside. And we've had some four fantastic examples of that passion for books, 4 very, very different passions there. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining, and a huge thank you to the presenters and all the other applicants. If you're rushing off for something at 2 o'clock, now is the time to leave us. We'll be emailing you a feedback form. It will be fantastic to get your comments, because this is the first time that we've run this series online, so we're still finding our way. If you're hanging around, please do jot down your questions in the chat panel. You can find that at the bottom of the screen. There's a square symbol that says chat. And you can post your questions there for any or all of the speakers. And we've got one here that says, thank you everybody for 4 great talks. I absolutely agree. I think what's interesting is how you've each found something very personal to you, but powerful enough to absorb you to start building up these collections. So do post your questions there while we hang on. That's fantastic. And I've got a question for the speakers. I just wondered, when you first started to build up your collection, or first started to think of yourself as a collector, I don't know if any of you would like to answer that. You can switch your videos on again if you want to. Kit, when did you first start your collection? Oh, we're gradually getting speakers back. I think kids, there you go, kids. Now you'll each have to unmute yourself.
I think I mentioned in my talk before, but it was just off the back of reading that non-fiction book, The Most Dangerous Book. It just told such an interesting story that I wanted to go and find I don't know, something to live up to that, or to kind of match that history of the book physically. So that's why I started collecting copies.
Because you'd actually got a copy before that, so it's that shift in thinking that actually this is something that you want to build up. That's interesting. Bori, how about you? Because you also children's books, aren't they?
Yes, so some of the books I already owned, and then the way the collection started was I realized that many of the books that I owned as a child were all illustrated by her. So I became interested in it and started consciously like building it and getting more books.
Yeah, they're absolutely beautiful illustrations. We've got a question for you specifically, Bori. Where have you found your books for sale? And do you know anything about who might have owned them previously?
So I got most of them from secondhand bookstores and or they were already in the family collection.
Mm-hmm.
So since I got them from secondhand bookstores and none of them are very rare or difficult to find, I actually have no way of knowing who they belong to before.
Yeah, which is so often the case, and that's why it's so nice to see Kit's collection. Just one comment, a lovely comment in the chat. As a bibliophile and librarian, this person says, I greatly enjoyed the presentations and they inspired great enthusiasm and the belief that printed, illustrated and fine books will continue to matter in the digital age for the young generation. Thank you all from Bamberg, Germany, and happy collecting. So that's a lovely comment from somebody in Germany. Kelly, when did you first start to think about collecting these books? Because you studied quite a different historical period in your university course.
Yeah, so I don't actually remember a specific time when I had the realization that, okay, now I'm a book collector, I'm gonna collect. But I've loved reading and buying books ever since I was a little kid. And I remember I have this habit of like, if I am like shopping for a famous title, which have like different editions that I can choose, I think I will always go for the prettiest one, like the one that's like, you know, like on the basis that the contents are the same, and I would go for the one edition that has the most beautiful design and binding. And and I think it gets more and more serious as I like go and travel to more places, and I started exploring secondhand bookstores. So I think it all started with my love of books and reading books, and also I studied at UCL about manuscript and rare books, and I think that's when I really became more professional in considering the backgrounds and designing and the styles of the rare books.
So you have a real feel for the physical books, don't you?
Yeah.
Now we've got questions coming in. I know we'll come to Kit in a minute, but for Blake, there's a quick question. The poster is fascinating. Have you come across any other Ulysses or Joyce souvenirs, or even kitsch?
Thanks for asking. The only thing I can think of, which is now unfortunately smashed, is I had a Ulysses mug, but nothing. It's something I definitely want to look into more, because I thought the poster was so kind of interesting, and I think it's there's a big opportunity for it just because it's such an enormous like heft of text and that it's got so much kind of weight behind it that there's lots of different things to do with it. But I guess, you know, unfortunately the answer is no, not right now, but hopefully soon. I would like to, you know, get some kitsch, definitely.
And there's a comment here in the chat for Blake. The connection to or with travel and your trip to Dublin is a great dimension. One interest, books, leads to the exploration of a place, which is excellent, and I think that's true for many of you.
Yeah, I mean, just to briefly say, like, it was having read Ulysses for several years, then actually visiting Dublin was really strange and exciting. So yeah, it is interesting.
Yeah. Kit, I just thought I'd bring you in there because you haven't had a chance to say. Now, you started off your collection with a book from your grandparents. When did you start to think that you might collect other things like that?
I think there was never necessarily a point really that I was like, oh, I'm now collecting specifically for this. But I think it's one of those things that just sort of happens once you keep your eye out for something. You suddenly just see it everywhere. And so yeah, I think it wasn't really until I saw the email for this competition that it sort of struck me that I was like, oh, I guess I have actually been collecting those things fairly consistently. And but yeah, I think it was definitely a very gradual thing that didn't really occur to me, because I think I didn't necessarily link it to my degree very much in my head, sort of until a bit later, that I was like, oh, I can actually, you know, place these within a historical context. So yeah, it was a very, very accidental start for me, I think.
That's interesting. I love the imagination with which you've built that collection with a very simple idea, and the serendipity that must be involved in
completely, yeah. I think it's really nice now because I've spoken to a couple of people about this, and so I keep getting messages from friends and family, and they're sending me books in the post that they've found, sort of from all corners of the earth. So someone's just sent me an incredible edition of a very weird medical book that was in Hawaii, sort of at the time that the Americans were taking control, sort of early 1900s, and it's just incredible, and the entire book has been annotated by the author. So yeah, getting stuff from all corners of the world now, so I'm very happy.
Absolutely, and that's a very long journey. There's going to be plenty of things to collect.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kit. We've got a question for Kelly. Thank you for your wonderful talks, everyone. A question for Kelly: with such fine vellum covers among your collection, do you store them in any special way to protect them?
Well, yeah, unfortunately, I don't have like the professional storage for my books. I put most of them in a wooden bookcase. And yeah, for this one, it came with a plastic film on the top, so I think it works as a form of protection. But for the larger one, it doesn't come with anything. So usually I just lie it flat on the desk, because when I got it, the cover is already like contracted to some extent. So I think, yeah, just lie it flat, and maybe in the future I will make some boxes for them. Yeah, that's the plan.
Yeah, and you all are, I know from the application process, really starting to think about how to care for these. But what's fantastic and inspiring is that there's a real new generation of collectors, and you're some of them, and all of the 64 applicants represent those who are starting to think about the physical side of our print and our verbal legacy, our written legacy, I should say, and how that might survive and be preserved and be looked after parallel to the digital, which is another huge topic of digital preservation. And that's incredibly inspiring. I think we've come to the end of the questions, so I'd just like to thank you all and our other finalists, Alex Plain, who spoke earlier in the series as the winner of the competition, but also to our other two finalists, Imogen and Naomi. And a huge thank you to the judges and to the Anthony Davis, to our wonderful moderators, Harriet Hale, our Rare Books cataloguer, and Helen Biggs, who's the librarian in Special Collections, who's helped with the outreach and the teaching and the exhibitions. So thank you to everybody and to our audience. This has been a real celebration of books, and I hope that you all have a very good summer and that all of the finalists and the applicants continue to enjoy your book collections.
Thank you. This has been fun.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you.
very much. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.